Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. We will wait for a few minutes for the people in the waiting room to join and then we'll start. Okay, I think it looks like we have sufficient number of people who have joined and we can now begin. Welcome everyone and thank you for joining another edition of the IRENA Insights webinar series. My name is Karan Kocher and I'm joining from IRENA's Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn, Germany. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, IRENA is an intergovernmental organization with 170 member countries, and we also have another 15 countries in their accession process. And we support our countries in the transition to a sustainable energy future and also aim to serve as the principal platform for international cooperation, a center of excellence, and a repository of policy, technology, resource, and financial knowledge on renewable energy. And the work that we do and our engagement with our members generates a lot of insights, and we are constantly looking for more ways to share those insights with you. And that is why we have launched this webinar series. We have organized around 75 webinars on various topics, and you can check them all on our IRENA events page. The link to that will be in the will be in the presentation slides that we will upload on the events page. We understand that there are many longer deep dive webinars out there, but our aim with these webinars is to keep them short and sweet, lasting approximately 30 minutes. While we cannot cover everything in this time frame, we do hope to give you enough information and more than that, the sources of more in-depth information to help you explore the topic further. So today, in the next 30 minutes, we will hear from Francisco Gaffaro and Daniel Salim, who will share insights from IRENA's latest report titled The Potential of Green Hydrogen and Related Commodities Trade. But before I hand over the microphone over to them, a few housekeeping items. The webinar will be recorded and posted on the IRENA events page. We will also post the slides along with it. You're by default on mute, but we will encourage you to use the Q&A or the chat function to ask any questions. We will have a dedicated session for the Q&A at the very end of the presentation. And without any further ado, let me welcome Francisco and Daniel to our IRENA Insights webinar series. Francisco, Daniel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
And thank you everybody for attending this webinar. This is a very nice opportunity for us to show our work and maybe to invite you to look deeper into the report. So first, I would like to start with a little bit of context. This work was done, sponsored by the European Union, was funded by the EU, and it was part of a larger project within IRENA, which is called Innovation to Foster Renewable Energy Transition, IFRET, where we were looking at different innovations in different sectors to move forward with the energy transition and with the decarbonization of the energy sector. In this specific work, our main objective was to identify cost-effective patterns for the trade of hydrogen and hydrogen commodities at a global level. This work builds on previous works and publications that we have dedicated to the topic of hydrogen trade. In 2022, we published a large report where we first presented like this concept of the potential for trade of hydrogen, with the assumptions at the time in terms of cost, of demand, of carriers. And at the time, one important aspect, like this was like the first experience, we focus only on hydrogen as hydrogen molecules, if we can call it. Building on that work, the one that we are presenting here is like an evolutions where, of course, with the time that has run and then the evolution that the narratives have had. So we updated assumptions, and also very important, we move forward in terms of modeling not only as hydrogen but also to include commodities, because this is like the way we saw that the narratives and the perspectives were looking ahead, not really trade of hydrogens, but commodities produced from hydrogen, and specifically in our case, green hydrogen. And let's say, like, based on this main objective, then what we aim was to provide information and arguments and let's say model arguments for informing national and regional policies and strategies, uh, support the development of partnerships, support countries to identify their potential role within this possible trade of the hydrogen, and with that also identify potentials for countries to develop their own just and inclusive participation in this whole landscape. Next slide, please, Karen. Before discussing or talking about the trade itself, I want to maybe give a very brief discussion on what the role of hydrogen, and especially green hydrogen, would be in a decarbonized energy systems. This picture here, or these plots, they belong to our flagship report, the World Energy Transition Outlook, which is like the presentation of our different scenarios up to 2050. In our decarbonization scenario, or net zero scenario, hydrogen plays a very important role. We see here in the right is the 2050 decarbonization scenario. Despite, let's say that this decarbonization energy system is mainly, or the main component is electricity. Electricity is expected to provide more than 50% of the total energy, or to cover over 50% of the final energy consumption. There are sectors that cannot be electrified, so that their electricity energy needs cannot be met with electricity. And there, together with biomass and other means, hydrogen will play a very important role. And hydrogen will not, so it's not only to be seen as an energy carrier, but also is a feedstock that can feed different industry processes that are, again, hard to electrify, and this is what we call the hard-to-abate sectors. And in this context, and let's say, despite current discussions and the speed of the takeoff of hydrogen, still on the decarbonized vision, the role of hydrogen is very relevant, because it serves in certain applications or situations where other means or other carriers cannot act. And according to our scenario, around 14% of the total final energy will be covered with hydrogen in this decarbonized 2050 world. And of course, most of it, in this case, 94%, will be green hydrogen. Green hydrogen, so it's hydrogen produced with electricity, and electricity coming from renewable energy resources. The next slide, please. The methodology of the work that we did, and that led us to the results that my colleague Daniel is going to show you in a few minutes. So it's an optimization model. It's a very large optimization model that is implemented in the software Plexus. And so let's say that we have some main inputs, which is a demand for green hydrogen and green commodities. Specifically in the model, we are modeling as separate commodities, green ammonia, e-methanol, and DRI, or direct reduced iron, and the other commodities associated with green hydrogen, like e-fuels, are modeled as hydrogen. I mean, this is like a limitation that on the model, and part of the work ahead. So what inputs, let's say, is the demand of the hydrogen and these commodities, costs for electrolyzers, for renewable energy facilities, for infrastructure facilities. Trade constraints, it means like we model like different possibilities or routes for trade, either per pipelines or marine transport, a total of, if you see, so on the left part of the figure are the inputs. In the middle is kind of the process, and you see that we had almost 2,000 trade possibilities between regions. And talking about regions, the model is at a global level, so it has a global coverage, and the world is divided in 35 regions, which includes G20 countries, and the rest of the world is aggregated in regions. We also include material availability or raw material availability for the production of commodities within these regions, efficiencies, and also parameters regarding the cost of capital for investing in the facilities. And then all this went into this optimization process, whose aim was to supply the annual demand in one specific target year, 2050, of the green hydrogen and the commodities. And as a result of that, then there was a optimal, according to model and model assumptions, production per region, the volumes of trade. So volumes of hydrogens are commodities that were used or consumed locally, but also that were trade, investments in infrastructure, and also through that we could identify like strong or remarkable trade patterns, which would also potential trade partnerships. Very important, and you may already have noticed, is that this is a pure techno-economic model. So geopolitical constraints are not directly considered there, could be indirectly considered constraining the trade possibilities, but it was not our intention with this work, because as mentioned at the beginning, this is more at looking at the potential to supply the demand of this energy carrier, or carrier and feedstock associated with clean energy in a cost optimal way. Next one, please. Here is maybe just a snapshot. Because of time, we cannot discuss too much. But it's about the assumption that we took for the demand. There was an extensive research on the different regions, on what were the expected levels of demand for the different commodities. In our case, or in our base case, total global demand for 2050 was equivalent to 216 million tons of equivalent hydrogen. So equivalent means that in the case of DRI, or in the case of ammonia, it's the equivalent hydrogen there in the commodity. Again, the commodities that we assess, so were ammonia, methanol, DRI, and gaseous hydrogen, and the demand of other commodities that were not explicitly modeled, so was part of the gaseous hydrogen, and this demand was distributed by the different regions. Next slide, please. Finally, before presenting the results of the work, which are also published in our report, some kind of caveat, or maybe some guidance to the interpretation of the results, as I mentioned before. So this is a pure cost optimized supply and demand with this geographical scope, which is global, but with some aggregation. So we have these 35 regions. We do not directly consider political or geopolitical aspects. It's based on a predefined set of assumptions like demand and cost. So in this work, we were not doing projections of demand or projections of cost, but we were taking from the literature and our own publications from IRENA these assumptions for the scenario. So those are the, let's say, the cost optimal trade patterns based on the set of assumptions that were taken to the work. It only covers green hydrogen produced with electrolysis. And, I mean, it's so our contribution, we consider that is this identification of these regions which can help or can support a cost optimal or a lower cost supply of the demand, but of course, this needs to be complemented with other economical, political, and social studies and considerations. With that, I want to give space to my colleague Daniel to present the results. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Francisco. Here are the first results. It's about trade volumes. Before going into results, let me brief about scenarios. So we assessed two main scenario possibilities. The first one was same WACC scenario, where every country faces the same financing conditions, specifically a 5% weighted cost of capital. This scenario provides insights based on purely resource-driven competitiveness. And the other scenario is the differentiated WACC scenario, where financing conditions vary by country based on typical risk profiles. This may be considered as more realistic scenario, and illustrates how access to affordable capital changes global trade patterns. So here in this slide, we see in the same WACC scenario, around 20% of global hydrogen equivalent demand, around 53 million tons, is supplied through international trade. Importantly, about 72% of all traded hydrogen is shipped as commodities. And ammonia is the most traded commodity at about 30% of the demand, followed by methanol at 18% and DRI at 14%. For gaseous hydrogen, it was around 14.4%, but as Francisco explained, it includes other commodities as well, like e-fuels and others clubbed in this part. Next slide, please. So under same WACC scenario, here we see expected global trade patterns under this scenario assumptions. So here we see hydrogen commodities. Ammonia is shown in dark green color, methanol in yellow, and DRI in red. Gaseous hydrogen is shown in sky blue color. Liquid hydrogen and liquid organic hydrogen carriers, which are like on the extreme right, they are only, we observe their trade only in East Asia and in little quantities. But three main commodities we consider like which are shown are ammonia, methanol, and DRI. How to rate it? The thickness of the lines actually represents the volume of green commodity in million ton hydrogen equivalent. Circles with square inside represent the origin of the green commodity supply, while the circles with cross inside represent commodity demand. Ammonia, methanol, and DRI are traded by ships, while gaseous hydrogen is traded via pipelines, and you can see the gaseous hydrogen trade is mostly concentrated in North Africa and Europe and within Europe. We can also identify major exporters and importers for each commodity. Overall, major exporters in this scenario include Latin America, Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And major importers are Europe, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia. Um, Methanol trade is heavily shaped by the availability of biogenic carbon, which was included in the modeling scope, while flows are influenced by local iron ore availability. So we did model raw materials availability to produce those commodities. Next slide, please. In the previous slide, we saw major exporters and importers for each of the analyzed hydrogen-derived commodities. This slide highlights net exporters and net importers in terms of overall hydrogen equivalent. Regions like Latin America, I think, what are the trade volumes? So Latin America has a net export volume around 5.5 million ton hydrogen equivalent, Middle East 4.4, North Africa 10.5, and rest of Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa has net export potential of 6.2 million ton hydrogen equivalent, while we can also see Europe, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia importing different commodities, but in overall terms, they are net importers of hydrogen, equivalent hydrogen, yeah. While 10 million ton import of hydrogen equivalent is relatively can be seen relatively large for the EU, I think it's important to mention that it represents only 30% of the total hydrogen demand for the EU, and the remaining 70% would be met through local production. There are also some interesting insights due to constraints on raw material availability. For example, if you see the Middle East is expected to be a strong exporter of ammonia and DRI, but actually a net importer of methanol, and this is because of limited biogenic carbon in Middle East. So raw materials availability did impact the results in this global hydrogen and commodities trade. Next slide, please. So this is the differentiated WACC scenario where financing conditions shape the competitive landscape of hydrogen and commodity trade. Regions with low expected financing costs like Australia, China, and the US become major exporters in this scenario, even if their VRE resource quality is not, I would say, not superior or not better to regions like Africa and Latin America. And in contrast, regions with the excellent natural resources but higher financing costs, such as Africa and Middle East, lose competitiveness in this scenario. Europe's import requirements decrease significantly from 10 million ton to 7 million ton because local hydrogen production becomes more cost competitive under lower domestic financing costs compared to overseas imports. Australia emerges as the dominant exporter of green hydrogen-based DRI due to low financing costs and strong iron ore resources, as shown in the red lines or trade flows. Next slide, please. So when we compare the two scenarios, several important differences emerge. DRI trade increases from 14 to 21%. From same WACC scenario to differentiated WACC scenario, gaseous hydrogen trade decreases from 14% to 9% because financing advantages tend to favor domestic production in Europe. Ammonia trade increases slightly from 30 to 35%, while methanol trade declines from 18 to 14% due to carbon limitations. Also, we run sensitivity analysis, and which shows that renewable generation costs tend to increase international trade, while uh, higher transport costs push the system toward greater local production and therefore less trade. Electrolyzer costs changes have a relatively small impact, I would say, on trade patterns. Also, we run a sensitivity of uniform increase in WACC assumptions from 5 to 8%, which slightly reduces the trade volumes. It is also interesting to see how different countries are affected differently by the changing scenario. Countries like USA shifted from being net importers to net exporters. Others, such as Canada, became major exporters from previously being moderate exporters. Some countries like those in the EU experienced a reduction in imports, while others such as Japan and Korea remain largely unaffected by changing in the scenario. Next slide, please. To meet global hydrogen and hydrogen-derived commodities demand in 2050, as per our analysis, the world needs $2.5 trillion of infrastructure investments, and this includes 4.7 terawatt of new renewable capacity, more than 2 terawatts of electrolyzers, and substantial dedicated storage, particularly to stabilize variable renewables. The system also requires significant investments in conversion facilities, maritime shipping capacity, and hydrogen or ammonia-ready port upgrades. And much of this infrastructure is non-existent today, so scaling up will be a major global undertaking. Next slide, please. These are the key insights and takeaways from the analysis. The first insight is that hydrogen-based commodities are likely to dominate international trade as they provide cost-effective solutions and scalable transport options compared with pure hydrogen. Creating a stable demand is also critical to attract investments and enable international markets to develop. Another important insight is the growing significance of certification for hydrogen-based commodities. It is central to ensure transparency around carbon intensity and fostering credible market formations. We also see that significant investment across the entire value chain will be needed. This includes, as mentioned in the previous slides, all infrastructure elements, generation, electrolyzers, conversion, storage, transport, etc. At the same time, whether a region becomes a competitive exporter or importer will heavily depend on financing conditions, particularly the weighted average cost of capital. This is how we design our scenarios based on these financing conditions. A trade in these commodities can also support a just and inclusive energy transition, promoting industrial development and value creation in resource-rich regions. This can be observed in the upper figure, where countries with a very small share of the global economy currently can be seen as a higher contributor as exporters of hydrogen in the dotted box of light in the light green dotted box. International cooperation will also be essential to create the policy framework, standards, and infrastructure required to scale global hydrogen commodity trade. Also, energy security. This can be this can offer opportunity to enhance energy security by diversifying supply and reducing reliance on fossil fuels. And this can be seen on the right-hand side, where we see new entrants of hydrogen and commodities, as shown in the dotted box. Finally, it's also important to note that most hydrogen equivalent demand, around 80% globally, is expected to be met domestically, with only 20% supplied through international trade. And this highlights the need for tailored national policies, robust infrastructure, targeted investments, initiatives, and strong financial instruments. While international trade will be important, I would say developing domestic production, transport, and storage capacity is critical to meet most of the demand and enabling countries to fully participate in the emerging expected hydrogen economy. Thank you.
Thanks, Francisco and Daniel. Thank you for the presentation. We are actually running out of time, but we have space to take a couple of questions. The report is already published as already one question. It's available on the website, and we will also link it to the presentation slides, so you can access it. But my first question, I will maybe ask Francisco or Daniel if you would also like to complement it. You had initially mentioned about the interpretation of results, and how would maybe the geopolitical risks affect the trade patterns that were outlined in the results part?
Yeah, very brief. As we mentioned in the assumptions, so here we are only looking at this potential, so no, where there's a
Yeah.
cost differential and then there's a potential. So any geopolitical tension will affect these potential patterns for trade, and then somehow will limit it, and that's why we say, okay, this is like a first step. You identify potential, but then we also need to look ahead. This is like let's say in terms of hydrogen or a commodity from going from one region to the other. And another important aspect to consider there, which Daniel was mentioned, is the impact of the cost of capital in our case. It was represented in the model by the WACC, by the weighted average cost of capital. And this is because green hydrogen, the cost, let's say the levelized cost of green hydrogen, highly depends on the cost of electricity. And electricity is renewable electricity, and this is highly dependent on the investment cost. So because the variable costs are very low, so really a major factor impacting all this is the cost at which the countries or the regions may access the capital to invest in the facilities. This will have a major impact as we saw in the results.
Thanks, Francisco. We have time only for one more question, and Daniel, maybe you can answer that since you were talking about the modeling results. Could you maybe briefly explain what is the scope of the hydrogen and commodity value chain that was captured as a part of the study? What was included, and how does that affect the interpretation of the results that you had explained at the very end?
Yeah, thanks, Karan. Can you share a slide regarding scope of the model, please? I will be very quick to explain it. So as Francisco already mentioned, several caveats, but this is the overall scope of the model, I would say. I think it's important to know what the model includes and what it doesn't. The model identifies the most cost-effective global trade patterns for green hydrogen and hydrogen-based commodities, and we already mentioned those commodities. As shown in the figure, the model captures hydrogen production from electrolyzers using renewable energy, conversion step where hydrogen is converted based on raw materials into commodities, transport by pipeline or ship, and reconversion step wherever needed. We can see ammonia cracking step there. It also this figure also highlights what the model doesn't include, such as the complexities related to sector-specific energy demand, detailed national policies, and hydrogen use in the power sector, etc. This requires, honestly, very more complex modeling approach, which is beyond the scope of this study. Also important to highlight, this model only focuses on 2050 single year investment scenario. The analysis does not compare different hydrogen production pathways, green, blue, gray, or turquoise. It does not look also does not look on alternative substitute for hydrogen-based commodities, only green hydrogen. Also granularity, I think Francisco already explained that we focus only on G20 countries and some additional countries like Colombia, Chile, Morocco, Portugal, Spain, Ukraine, and other regions are aggregated, representing the rest of the world. And these techno-economic drivers, I would say, they capture renewable energy availability, technology cost, transport distances, and conversion efficiencies, as shown on these three steps. And only based on these factors, it determines which regions become competitive exporter or importers. So they only highlight cost optimal patterns under this modeling assumption, and it's important to understand that actual trade could, or if I may say, most likely look different because of infrastructure limitations, financing constraints, or geopolitics or other real world problems. So the model is meant to illustrate potential patterns and structural insights, and not to predict exact volumes of trade. And the major exporter and importers are determined by techno-economic competitiveness, while real world conditions would eventually shape the trade landscape. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. Unfortunately, our time is up for today. Thanks, Francisco. I see you're answering some questions that are pending on the Q&A feature. I would like to thank Francisco and Daniel for their time and sharing their knowledge and insights on this work. I would also like to thank everyone for joining us today and for their attention and their questions. We hope you learned something new. The recording and the slides will be posted on the IRENA events website for those who missed any part of the webinar. Have a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you soon with more webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.